Welcome to Project Scope Management Summary. We'll take a look at all the processes of scope and how they interact. Let's start off with a topic from integration. You do know that in integration, the Develop Project Management Plan process gives you a project management plan. And you do remember, hopefully, that the Develop Project Charter process gives you a project charter. So the project charter and the project management plan are two of the most important documents as you study. But I want you to remember this. In plan scope management, you need the project management plan as an input to it. You also need the project charter as an input to it. As you begin to plan how to scope out the project, these two documents will help you. In addition to this, be aware that the project management plan goes to all the other processes in scope management. The project management plan goes to control scope, it goes to validate scope, it goes to collect requirements, it goes to define scope, it goes to create WBS. So when you take a macro look at project scope management, just remember the project management plan is an input to all those processes. And once the scope management plan is created, remember, it implicitly gets to be part of the project management plan, and that's why you need it across all of scope management. Bear in mind that there are some inter-knowledge area relationships, namely, requirements documentation comes from collect requirements, and it goes into define scope. I often say to my students, requirements begets scope. The more requirements you have, the likely it is you'll have more scope. Also, bear in mind that the requirements documentation is an input to validate scope and create WBS. The requirements traceability matrix, also from collect requirements, goes to validate scope. Whenever you see these things happening, ask yourself, why do we have a requirements traceability matrix going in to validate scope? And the answer is simple. As the customer is reviewing that deliverable, inspecting that product, service, or result, the requirements traceability matrix should be referred to. In fact, on a project I worked on in the past, we would require that the requirements traceability matrix be signed off by those stakeholders inspecting the deliverable. There are several feedback loops here. You can also see the requirements traceability matrix go into control scope. Now let's talk about integration again, because there's a very important relationship between direct and managed project work and validate scope. Right up here, we can see how work performance data, as usual, makes its way from direct and managed project work into a process in the monitoring and controlling process group outside of integration. We see this happening throughout the PMBOK guide. So work performance data goes to validate scope. It also goes to control scope as an input. Now, don't forget the other relationships between control scope and monitor and control project work, and validate scope and monitor and control project work. Remember, if WPD goes in, WPI must come out and go back into monitor and control project work. So we have two processes in monitoring and controlling in scope management that give you work performance information that goes back into monitor and control project work. Don't lose sight of this relationship between validate scope and the process known as perform integrated change control and control scope, because both validate scope and control scope give you change requests. And these change requests, as you see on the screen, which I will circle in red, need to be processed. And they are processed through the perform integrated change control process. And that's the overarching idea. If you have change requests, they must be processed, regardless of the knowledge area. They will all become an input to that one process, perform integrated change control. So think about it like this. Let's put a red circle around it one more time. Perform integrated change control is the only process that uses change requests as an input to it. It's worth noting. Moving on, we can also see accepted deliverables is an output that comes from validate scope and goes into close, project, or phase. And this is where we close out either a phase or the project as a whole. So when you take a look at project scope management, be sure to take note of the interconnection points between processes. Instead of reading your PMBOK guide ad nauseum, watch these videos, get a good idea of the interrelationships, and then go back to the PMBOK guide. Take a look at those processes again and see them in a different light. But no matter what you do, be sure to know the high-level picture, the high-level story of each knowledge area. Will save you a lot on the exam. See you in the next episode.